did
And
you
then,
go for?
oh, it's live now.
All good. Well, welcome everyone to the third workshop of the Saga Multiverse Hackathon. Today we are joined by Minta from the scenario.com team, and they are creators of generative AI platforms that are enabling game developers to accelerate their time to market. So in this session, you'll learn all about the tools that they have to offer and how to apply them to build a game and build upon your project to succeed in this hackathon. So I don't want to take up too much of everyone's time. So Minta, feel free to get the ball rolling.
Awesome. Hi, I'm Minta Karlsson. I'm the lead AI artist and head of customer success at Scenario. As it was said, we are really trying to help game designers and developers bring to market, reduce busy work, and be able to train style consistent game assets, which is something that we're not seeing a ton of support around in the Gen AI community. So being able to really not just create beautiful assets, but create beautiful assets that can be repeated, can be generated time and time again, and you can build a world around. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. I have a whole bunch of lovely things to share. Just to give you a little bit of a preview to what we're doing today. I'm going to start by just showing you the basics of the platform. I'll then make some suggested tools to look at and a suggested workflow for those who are just completely new to this and have never maybe never even touched an art material before. Maybe you're someone who is more on the dev side, and this is, we all know that it's important to have your hands on art, whether it's for communicating with an art team, that those communications can get confusing, they can get dismantled by misunderstanding. So having a generative AI tool can be really helpful, or creating the art yourself. This tool can be leveraged in multiple ways. So just sharing my screen here. So as you can see, I'm gonna hide my little thing so I can see as well. When you go to scenario.com, it's very, very simple. Start creating today. Normally, it will actually prompt you to enter an email, and then it's going to send you an authorization code to your email. So that's your key to getting in. You can either go to your private workspace, which is where you'll normally start, or you can set up a team workspace if you're working with a team. Within the team workspace, for most developers will want to know this straight away, you can create API keys. So we are beta testing a Unity plugin as well. You can feel free to get in touch with us about that. But ultimately, the API key is being used in a multitude of ways right now. We have users who are creating web apps with it. We have people pipelining it through different programs, people using it in their internal flow. The API supports anything that the web supports. You can access the documentation super easily at our docs.scenario.com, and this has some recipes, a reference guide, as well as our change log and some discussion. This has been a really, really useful tool. Even someone like myself, who's not so much a coder and developer, has been able to get some answers from the API web app. Additionally, there's just a multitude of ways that you can use Scenario. So I'm going to start by going through the very, very basics. First and foremost, we are about customization, so you can create a generator. Normally, the create a generator screen will populate you to something like this, where you can add images and walk through a training protocol. Because we have plenty of time today, I'm going to show you both a very simple training protocol and a more complex one. But first, I want to show you a place where you can plan out your training. So if we go to generators, and I'll just go through it again. I went a little fast. Generators, you'll see yours, and you'll see public. We're going to go to public. And the majority of our public generators actually have their training information here, which I'll explain in a moment, as well as their training image to give you a reference point. Especially for those who are brand new to Gen AI, I really recommend that you start there. You start by prompting one of these generators that has been tested. I'll show some of those prompts in a minute. They're meant to be easy to prompt. They're meant to be what they're described to be, relatively straightforward. And they're meant to show a range. For example, treasure chest is a very fit use case. It's just meant to create treasure chests, and you can see the type of data set you would need for that. Whereas something like, let's say, one of our most popular generators, Bubbleverse, because it creates a huge amount of really complex and diverse assets. It's built to be a particular world style. And as you can see, it has a massive range of input. These are our data set images, and these are the images it was trained on. So this is another example. You can even zoom into those images and click through. It's oftentimes the biggest challenge we see with users who are just starting with the platform is just not knowing what data to use. So I'll go through that a bit, but you can always check the public generators. You can always look at how they were trained. And we definitely recommend that. There were a couple that were trained in a little more of an advanced way, the asset diffusion and the 80s anime. And so those aren't going to be as good of a reference point, but everything else in this section, except for the last two here. So potions through the European comic style are really good reference points. So additionally, if we go to my generators, I'm going to show you how to create a generator. So you can go just to the create a generator screen if you're trying to upload images. In this case, I've actually curated some data sets already. So I'm going to go to copy generator over in the right here. And it just takes a second for it to populate all of the information. But as we're waiting, I'll just show you here, we have the prompt embeddings, which I'll go over in a moment. But basically, if you find a prompt you really like, sometimes prompting helps to kind of guide the generator further. You can save that prompt and freeze it so that the generator always uses those prompts. So I'm going to call this Scenario Fantasy Test 3, because this is going to be the third time I've made it. And as you can see, it's a whole mix of images here. I would normally, if I was just starting out, I would upload these images and I would compare them to a generator that I like in the public generators. And I'd say, is there too much information? Is there not enough information? For example, I'm going to remove this wand because I see there's a wand that looks a lot like it. When we're training, we want to provide information that is diverse and different, because the more of the same information we show a Gen AI model, the more it learns those repeated differences. So these 4 wands, for example, are great to show because they are different directions and different shapes. Now, sometimes you will have a situation where, for example, you are using a generator you've created, you've made a really diverse data set, but one image keeps popping up and it keeps sort of pushing through. The details of it are sort of the most present. And you think to yourself, well, I was only in there once. That is sort of an interesting fact of Gen AI, that it's not just looking at the exact image, it's also looking at the world that that image exists in. So if you put in an object that naturally fits into the world you're training, on occasion, it will remember that piece of information a little bit too much because it's already been trained a certain amount. We're just training it a little further. In that case, just copy that generator again and remove that one piece, or add more diverse data, depending on how you're feeling about it. You can go either direction. Sometimes it's easier to remove one. Sometimes it's easier to provide more data. But we'll stick with this right now. So you can upload your images. If you were to upload an additional image, you could, let me just add one. It's not one I'm going to keep. It's just sort of a random image, but just to show you what it's like to upload. You can zoom in and out. Where you put your cursor will pick the part of the image you're zooming in and out to. You can also drag your box and shrink your box. And then once you have uploaded, you can actually remove the background as well. A note about removing the background, that is something that I recommend for characters and for specific use cases. But in fact, it doesn't see that removed background. So once their background is removed, it starts to fill in that information. So if you're trying to get consistent images on a blank solid background, you should provide consistent images with blank solid background information. So we've uploaded all our images and we're going to go to next. And the first one I'll do is auto, just to show that that's sort of the easiest in terms of what to pick, but it relies the most on your data set. So when you are, if you feel like really confident, wow, I have about 20 to 30 images, if it's a more general style, or if you're making just one specific subject, like a character or an object, you could do like 12 to 15. And you're like, wow, I feel like really diverse about what I'm giving for information. It's enough information. It's above 10 images, and it is the type of information that shows a lot of nuance of detail. Then auto is great, but it just relies on like having that piece where you have provided enough information for the model. Most people will have that, especially if they're world building. I'll show an example of, if you have bought an asset set and you have the rights to be able to generate within your own game what that asset would be. Of course, we're not suggesting to create more assets for other people to buy, but if you're using it in your game, I'll show you a workflow for that. But anyway, with the auto, you can pick your art style. In this case, I'm picking concept art. Illustration is also a very good one. That's what we have as our set default class. The more general, often the better. More specific classes of objects or objects to pick. Like if I picked food, it would be confusing, or even gems. There are gems in the training, but it would be confusing for the Gen AI because when it goes through this training process, it creates images and it compares those images to the images I'm training it with. So if I use gems, it of course would recognize the gems that I provided, but it would also recognize lots of other things. And that would lead to sort of a confusion and also a really difficult number of steps that it needs to catch up with. So we're going to stick with art style, concept art. You can use this for almost any training other than characters, in which case I recommend character design. If you're designing something that many different types of characters in a game, like a general aesthetic, or persons is my other suggestion if you're trying to like train a player character or a main character. So I will go back to concept art, and then with auto, you just click and it goes start training. And we actually just added this feature. You can see where it is in the training process. You can leave the page. It's not going to mess anything up, but you can check back. It'll tell you where it is, if it's making your class images, if it's getting ready to train, or if it's running the training process, and it will indeed actually show a bar for where it is in that training process. So you'll be able to really understand, okay, this is how long it has left. This is where it's at in the process. The first few steps don't take very long because it has class images already generated. So just to show you what it might look like if you were to, for example, use assets that you have the license to use, and you wanted to use them to build a more complex sort of training. And I'm just going to copy. As you can see, the outputs can be like super consistent. If you're doing maybe like a 4X game or a complex world building game. So I'll just copy the generator here. You can see my steps over here. I lowered the learning rate, but I'll show you that in a second as how I might use the advanced training steps. So for these, I'm just basing this off of images that this isn't something we share as like a public model because it is meant to be an asset that people pay for to use within their game, but I do know that I'm allowed to derive from it. So it's okay for me to make changes to the assets that I purchased for my one instance. So in this case, I'm using it to make myself a generator. As you can see, I've done a few different things. So all of the assets looked just about like this to begin with, this one to the right. You can see I've actually zoomed in on multiple assets, sometimes really close like this or this. I'm trying to show the generator the line work that I want it to pick up in these images. Like here, this is what I want it to look like when it's zoomed in, and that will make up like 20% of my images. This is a little more of an advanced use case and a little more of an advanced training, but I just want to give this to you guys, especially since this is being recorded, as a chance to really think about ways to strategize training. Sometimes I'm even using just about the same picture or a similar picture to zoom into, so that it actually has the context of not just the zoomed in, but also the zoomed out image, because I don't want it to default to zooming in. I want to keep it about 25% or less of the images are zoomed in, and I want to show what it looks like when it's zoomed out. So you can see it's a lot of different environments. And I've used a fair number of pictures here, but they're fairly diverse and nuanced. And there's one other step I'm going to take to make sure that it doesn't like sort of train it into oblivion, because you can overtrain and then it will actually hold on to too much information from your data set. So I'm going to switch to advanced. In this case, I'm picking art style illustration because in my opinion, those images look more hand-drawn. They look more illustrated. It will decide my number of training steps. Typically, unless you really have a lot of time on the platform you've spent, I don't recommend messing with that too much. That's based on an algorithm and it's helpful, but the learning rate. So in this case, I'm using a little more of the same images than I normally would, and I want it to pick up a lot of information slowly. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to lower the learning rate. This is 1E-5 and 2E-6. It's learning a lot of information, and it's learning the least amount of information. So I'm picking close to the bottom of that. Because I've tested this workflow, I know, and generally, if I am training something that has a lot of the same in it, I try to keep it below 6E6, because sometimes it will start to push into like an overfit, and it does default to certain settings in the auto as well. But for this, like I really dropped that learning rate down. I could even do 2E6 for this. So then I just start training. Again, it's going to go through that training process. Just to show you as well a strategy around that. So I've started that one, but you can see here, I've actually gone ahead and trained not just the map buildings, but also objects, background tiles, paper, map elements, because I can take those to my canvas. And this is kind of a long workflow. I'm just going to show you the very beginning of it. And I can actually, starting with the background tiles, I could, for example, prompt a meadow. And I can use my canvas for in-painting and out-painting to actually mask out areas in this image, switch to one of my generators that has these buildings trained in the same style, and generate them into this map. And you can do this for just about anything. You can do this for fixing faces, for example. You can do this for building hex tiles. That's something I was actually designing this for in particular, is being able to import the tiles from hexes that I bought and I want to use in my game, and create a generator that works with those hex tiles to populate into directly, which is, I know, like tiles and hex tiles, like square and hex tiles, are really useful in programs like Unity and useful in sort of the game development process on multiple levels. So as you can see, it's created this backdrop. So I could pick, this one, for example. I can go ahead and it takes can take a little time. It's a little, I think, one of the more time consuming applications, But in terms of getting new assets that no one else has in a style you really like for your game, I think it's pretty invaluable. I think it's a really, really useful tool. So we'll let this sort of run in the background. I'm just going to say a house and a meadow. We can go back to it later. One thing I will say, I have sort of prepped this almost like a cooking show, that sometimes I'll be prompting things on the fly, but most of the stuff I've actually prepped ahead of time. And I'm going to adjust my screen so I can easily kind of move around, because Zoom is kind of blocking me up here. So we're letting that go. In painting, because it has many processing steps, and out painting as well, take a little bit longer. So I recommend, like, I actually often have a few windows open. I'm generating a few different things. I'm adjusting things. I'm setting things up, because then I can have a really smooth and easy workflow. So the last thing I wanted to show about this particular process, before I get into more tools, we have so many tools and I want to be able to show you as many as possible, is, let's see. We were on the canvas and I wanted to bring you to our typical inference screen. Oh, since we're on it, help.scenario.com, you can also get to it in this little question mark button. This is our help desk. It has a ton of articles. You can search things by, let's say, Canvas, and you'll see a Canvas art, all the Canvas articles pop up, etc. So if you ever need to explore and want more information, this is a great way to do it. So I'm going to go to app.scenario.com, which is our web app. Let's see. Oh, it looks like Zoom makes things a little more complex for me because it blocks up a lot of stuff. So in this case, we're just going to have to adjust some things like the guidance. Again, this is why I normally don't prompt on the fly, because there's always so many different little pieces that you might need to adjust, but I'll get into that in the image inference piece. So we go to the generate images, and I'm actually going to work with a public model, because I want to show you how you could use a public model like asset diffusion, which is a really powerful public model. It's good at making graphics that look similar to low poly, look like they're in a 3D render style. It's very good at isometric buildings, which I'll show in a moment, as well as being really good at things like watercolor, which is often a game asset style, and a few other game asset styles. So asset diffusion, which is still in its beta, we're still improving this particular model, is one that you could potentially use to build a data set. So just like simple prompt, I envisioned prepping for this as like, what funny little game can I create? I was like, what if it was a game that was built in an isometric world or a top-down world? Maybe I want to compare the two and see which aesthetic I like better. And it's populated by ducks that you have to catch. So it's a duck themed game. So in this case, I can prompt something like a low poly duck game. I don't even have to prompt more than that. I can just write a low poly duck. And that's what I want. I want that from my generation. My dimensions are set. I'm going to do a square right now. Guidance indicates how much value is put on the prompt. So if you're having issues getting your prompt pushing through, you can up your guidance. But a note on that, a part of your prompt which you don't see is actually the token, that the word that indicates your model. So your generator, it indicates the style or whatever you've trained into it. So the higher you push guidance, the more that gets emphasized too. And so you want to, guidance can be very useful, especially if you're not seeing too many elements of your original image coming through. But you want to be careful, because guidance can also push that original imagery through and create that sort of effect of seeing too much of your data set. So as you can see, not always perfect. For example, I'm not sure that ducks have legs like that, but this is something I was anticipating, I had prepped for. This is great. So one of the ducks is really solid. This one's pretty good. And we could go on like that forever. We could create lots of little ducks. This one I like because it sort of, I could see it fitting in like an isometric world, but I don't want the background because I want to be able to layer it in things. So I can in fact remove the background, and it is going to download that duck without a background for me, which is super useful. I can also refine. I can zoom in the picture, and I can upscale. And right now the outputs are 512 by 512. Upscaling currently doubles that. And then there are additional upscaling features we're going to be releasing throughout June, which will add more power to the upscaling process. So that's one piece here. In addition, we'll check back on that one later. In addition, we can do a few other things. I've done a lot of prep work for this duck. So for example, I can upload a picture of a duck and use that as a reference image. In this case, the duck did have a background. I can actually remove the background of the picture. And if it's not a 1x1 square, I can adjust the aspect ratio. I'm showing here what happens when we do what we call image to image. In this case, we'll see that as composition control being disabled. That's just our default. Whenever you upload an image, composition control, which is a particular tool, is disabled. And when you click on the image, let's say we like this duck, I'm trying to make an evil duck character. You can see the reference image is image to image. So I know that this is image to image. Image to image takes the general color and shape of what I've created, and it will pull that data. It'll try to read the image, will pull the data of the picture, and then I can adjust the influence. So this was a 22 influence. I could bump the influence up to 70, and the output should be really similar to this duck that I had created, which could really work in a game like this. However, there are other tools we can use if we click through composition control. So I've actually prepped some of these. For example, I have scribble mode, which I'll show you in a second, but scribble mode actually creates a scribble drawing of whatever the original image is, and it uses that as a map. So in this case, scribble mode was able to create really like probably a more accurate duck in comparison to these ducks, which are not using that as a map. They're just using the general shape, the color, and whatever image information they take based on the influence I've indicated. In this case, you can see when the influence is up, that does look a lot more like this original duck here, which I'll zoom into. This is our duck. So you can see these two are very similar to one another. This one is also very similar. Yeah, this top row is meant to be similar. So if you want that exact duck, image to image is a good choice. And it can really paint over. Scribble, let's say we wanted to go to Scribble. Scribble, you would just drop down our composition control with character, landscape, city, interior. None of these really relate to what I'm trying to make here. Character, just as a note, is going to be both the pose of the character that you're introducing, but also it pulls out a lot of the depth information. So it's really understanding like a general framework of that character, which means if you upload an image for character, and I'll show you that also in a moment, you will get something really similar to that original image in the style that you want. Scribble is going to be a little less like strict. It will employ a lot of the general details. It's probably outlined the face and the body, but it's not going to get super detailed. Enable mode mapping. We want mode mapping enabled. Mode mapping usually is enabled by default, and this actually creates the map that it uses as an image. The few times where you might not do that are depth map or normal map. These are both tools that you can find in the 3D world. So you might have your own normal map of something, in which case, if you want it to just read your normal map, you would click enable mode mapping. It would not be enabled anymore, and it would just read the mode map directly. But I don't have that. I'm not doing that right now. We can compare something like normal map or Scribble. We'll do Scribble again. So we'll go quickly through that. The other ones that I've tested on this screen, and I have several screens of these because this is a highly complex tool that we have, are let's see, segmentation mode. Segmentation mode makes it like a color block reference of all the objects in your image. So it's looking at that original image it doesn't pick up any details. It just uses that color block, that like shape, totally flat, with whatever information it's getting from the prompt and the generator. And the other one I tested for this was I guess it was segmentation mode twice. I had tested a few on a different page, which I'll show you. But as you can see with Scribble, it's not holding on to any of the colors. None of composition control is going to really hold on to colors of the original image. It's always going to hold on to shapes or context information. Any color similarities are just sort of a fluke, unless it's something you've actively prompted. But maybe I like this mallard, so this is one I might go ahead and upscale and save as at least a reference. You know, this can be really useful if you're doing any 3D modeling or you're working with 3D designers. It also can be a useful tool for creating promotional material or creating standalone images as well in the 2D space. This one, I don't know what that screen was, but the other piece is like, let's say we wanted to make houses and buildings. So first and foremost, I had prompted a minimalist style isometric building for a duck themed game. I didn't add any images. This is just a straight prompt with asset diffusion. And you can see it has like pretty strong coherence with the actual like structure of isometric styles. That's what it was sort of trained for. It doesn't look like specifically duck themed to me, but it's we are always a little at the mercy of what the AI decides to pull from the prompt, and we can definitely adjust that with these tools I'm showing. The next thing I did was, okay, let's say it's not exactly asymmetric. It's very close to isometric, but AI can sometimes struggle with grids because of how it was trained. So I decided to add a isometric square to see if I could get something from that. And I used image to image to do that. As you can see, not the results I was expecting, maybe not the results you were expecting either. It kind of shifted the actual shape of the square, and it's not exactly what I was imagining there. Now I can adjust the aspect ratio, which I normally would do, but just for brevity's sake, I wanted to show what it would be like if I used different types of composition control. So I then switched to, okay, let's use edges mode. Edges, one of the composition controls that you can see in that drop-down menu, which I'll just show you again. Edges is right here. I'll just prompt another one of them just to see. Well, I like this. It does, in its own way, seem duck themed. Those are duck bills, in my opinion. It definitely is holding a very clear and straight lined isometric shape. And that's because edges mode looks at perfectly straight lines and corners. That's the information it's picking up and mapping in the composition control. And then it generates images based on those maps. You could also use something like, let me get back to composition control, our city or interior, which have edges in it. But ultimately, the point being that the only information it's getting fed by your reference image are the straight, sharp lines. So as you can imagine, that can be used in a multitude of really interesting ways because it adds more information after that. The next one I used was segmentation mode. Again, this is going to be paying some attention to the edges, but it's really paying attention to like how space is being used. And since this reference image is just like one block, it would have segmented out the different sections of that block and then use that as a reference for what is being filled in. And we can see it did do that. Not really something I would necessarily use, but I suppose if you're doing like a isometric, like sort of open world, you might do multiple levels. But for this use case, it wasn't quite perfect because it was looking at the top as being separate from the bottom, which was not my goal. But we can see why it would do that because of how that original image was created. Then I used scribble mode again. Scribble mode was pretty good at holding on to those hard lines. And so this is a possible solution. Again, it's going to look at the square the most. And then this is edges mode, which I think was like really the best as it's sort of full size. So it is adding things like openings and stuff like that. But for me, this worked. And this is just a super elementary version. And then if I wanted to really say, okay, well, this isn't really ducky enough, I can actually go into the prompt and add plus marks after the prompt. This is what we call prompt expressions. I know this is a lot of information. That's why we're recording it. So you can rewatch later if there's something interesting. And we are including all this in documentations as well. So you can find this in our help desk. And we will be updating that at the end of the week. Documentations do go over things like our prompt expressions. So prompt expressions can either be done with the plus, or if you want to actually give something a lower rate, you can put the prompt that you're trying to weight in parentheses, and without breaking a space, you can actually give it a 0.3 or something like that. So that's going to like bring the weight down. So as you can see, I went through the same steps. I did it without an image first. You can see there are some little ducks in there in the center there and stuff. I actually really liked this one, although there's not a lot of ducks there. Then I did just the regular image to image, which it kind of just flattened out that regular image to image. And it did try to add something that I'm not sure that they're ducks necessarily, but they're something. And then segmentation mode, it started to like, again, try to populate little ducks. They're a little too small. It was really once I got to edges mode again, where it started to add in the places where there aren't hard edges, actual ducks. And I was like, perfect, this is what I want. But maybe I want this duck to be a little different. This is what I want, but it's not perfect. So I could bring it to the canvas, or in this case, I could actually bring it to image. And I'll show you how I would do that. I would go to this. I click on the image. I can either remove background, upscale, or I can refine. Refine is going to continue to generate this image as a reference point for image to image. If I were to restart generation, that would actually take all of the data here, including this reference image, and start it from the beginning and not use this as a reference point. So that's sort of like picking up where you left off, and this is refining an image. So as you can see, I did a few different weights here. This is image to image with a 38 influence. So it's kind of changing that duck a lot. I don't really love how much it's changing it. 38 can sometimes be a small amount of change. It just depends on what you're prompting and what your style is. So I switched then to 58, so a little above 50, because I wanted it to sort of continue to make changes, but I didn't want it to change it so much that it didn't look like it. And that actually got me this duck, which I liked a lot, and this duck here, which I liked a lot. So any of those could potentially work. And then I tried dropping the influence really low because I just wanted to show what happens. So in this case, the influence is 4, barely any influence from that original picture. And you can see it's just holding on to really like the color patterns. It's not even holding on to this general shape. Like this is a totally different shape. The colors are a little bit different, but not significantly different. Image to image with a low influence is really understanding the color information first and foremost. So that's just a walkthrough of how that might work. I see some questions in the chat. Who owns the IP generated from these maps? And if I add my IP, do I need to open source? No, not at all. Nothing. Oh, showing the shoe. I'm not sure what the shoe was. I missed that question, but yeah, this is a really great question. These are all private. We use user data to improve the service, but what that means is really specifically related to how the actual models are trained. We wouldn't be allowed to like custom train your models. Like the program wouldn't be allowed to function if we weren't allowed to do that, because that is technically the program improving the service for you. Other than that, there's no there's no way for this information to publicly get into the ether. It does belong to you. I can't even access your workspace without a direct invitation, even as, head of customer success. Your IP, we're trying to make a platform that really does allow IP to be protected. So it's not being open source. We don't use any of that to train, we don't use any of those original images to train models that become public models. That's not how we function. So you won't see your images in a public model in the future. The IP generated from these maps, that is, again, not something we use. That's something that is meant to be your asset that you can use in your game, just as we put a lot of care around, we're not using something that we buy as assets on the Unity store to build a model. Like, you won't see that. You might see examples of how someone might use assets they have purchased in a workflow example, for example, like on a tutorial or something like that, because we do understand that people are allowed to change these for a single project. So we want to say, okay, if you were to change assets for a single project that you have the license to do that for, this is how you might do that. But you'll notice that those never make it into our public generators, because that would not fit our core values and not fit how we're trying to model this program for other people as well. Because I'm an artist myself, we care a lot about artists, and we do care a lot about respecting IP and protecting IP. So you can definitely check out our terms of service. It outlines it really clearly. But for some of those questions around how the data is used, we never touch it for images that are getting trained to be reproduced in these final models, because it wouldn't serve anyone in that case. And we never have. I don't imagine us starting that. I'm the one training a lot of these, and I've never touched anything like that. It would go against our core values. So hopefully that is a helpful answer there. How do I close chat? Sorry, just get this closed. Okay, so next, just showing how you might use a more specific shape. So if I was going to use a shape that I have licensed to use as a reference image, I'm just showing a few different composition control modes. This is structure mode. Structure mode actually makes a map of really, really intricate details. And then it will use that map to kind of define all of this information. So the structure and the original picture is actually going to be more impactful than your style or generator. So for example, if you're trying to create a character and you want it to get some influence from your input image, but not look exactly like that original character, then structure mode isn't really the right choice for you. The right choice for structure mode is often if you're trying to refine an image, it's a nice, sometimes instead of image to image, you might want to use structure. If you're trying to carry a lot of very specific details from original image other than color, then you might use structure. So that would be sort of my recommendation for how you might use something like structure mode. So next we have and I'll open this up to questions in about 5 minutes, just really quickly go through these last pieces here. We have depth mode. Depth mode's in between structure and segmentation. It does create a depth map, but what it carries from that is a certain amount of detail, especially detail that's reliant on shadow and background and foreground, but it's not going to be as true to detail as structure mode. So you can still get a lot of the influence from your original generator and your prompt. Then we have something like depth mode again. Sorry, I was clicked the same one. Then we of course have edges mode, just looking at those sharp edges. You can see it does add details beyond that, but they're using the edges as the reference points. Segmentation mode really just takes the shape. It's not looking really at that original structure at all. We can just compare here. It's sort of thrown out a lot of these details and looked at where the shape begins and ends. So this is a good one if you like know something needs to take up a certain amount of space, or you like the layout of an image, like where things are sitting in an image, but you don't want those original elements to have such direct influence. Scribble mode, again, picks up a lot of those details, but it's simplifying it a lot and it's allowing a lot of space for your generator and prompt. And then another example of Scribble, just showing the sort of nuance that you can get from it. I do want to check the chat here before I go further. I like opened that chat and now I am having a hard time finding the chat again. Or if there's anyone who can see the chat from the Dora team and can read any questions, I just can't seem to find the chat. Oh, there it is. Got it. Are there any other questions I can answer? I can always like go further, but certainly any live questions or questions that are put in the chat, I'm happy to take a look at and answer now. So could these generators be trained to create maps for texturing 3D models with proper image set and composition control, color, material, style variations, etc.? It depends on what you need. Certainly you can use depth maps and you can use normal maps, and you can use those as, like I was saying, if you have the depth map or the normal map from your 3D model, you can indeed upload it and it will follow that information to create the outputs. So I have seen users do that. We also have a texture lab, which we're going to be integrating into our API. It's just not integrated yet, but it is another part of our scenario workforce, which allows you to create textures from it, like ancient lines. You can type in a lot of things into texture labs, and it is a fairly nuanced tool. Let's see. And then let's see, I have pieces that I want to generate. How do I add it to the top to make a shoe? Should I train it? Is it one very like particular shoe that you're trying to train? Is it a shoe that someone's wearing? Those are questions that, like, is this a wearable? How does it fit into what you're trying to make? Because it sort of, it's all like very use case specific, I guess, is what I'm saying. Someone's asking about how to make a shoe generator, basically. Okay, a 3D shoe. So we don't do 2D to 3D, but let's see. A piece of generate, how to add it to top to make a shoe. If you have a 3D shoe and you want it to consistently output that 3D shoe as like different 2D angles that you could potentially use with like a depth map or a normal map to like reskin, what I would recommend is rendering many different angles of that shoe that you have, using that as a baseline image. And then you could use those renders also to make those depth maps and normal maps, or use them to generate on top of. The other thing too is if you're using those as depth and normal maps, you could, and you're just trying to like imply styles on top of them, what you could do is create generators that are actually just about the style patterns that you're trying to create, and superimpose them on top, either using canvas to mask them out and paint them in, or by using depth or normal to actually generate the style on top. So those would be some pieces. It may also be useful depending on the tool you're using. If it interacts with like Unity at all, we do have the Unity beta, which can be really useful in like a pipeline. So you can, I think, join our Discord or reach out on Twitter and we can give you access to the Unity beta, I believe. Yeah. Any other questions lingering here? Also feel free to bring that to our Discord. I should mention that we have a great, it's not like the most, it's not a super active Discord community, but all of our guides have access to it, and everyone on the CS team has access to the Discord community. So a few of our CS team members are 3D designers themselves and have explored different workflows, and they do continue to upload different workflows to our tutorial help desk. But if you ask questions on the Discord and ping guides, typically one of them will show up and will actually be able to answer some like workflow questions and support that. And we're always looking to also investigate different workflows. So it's worthwhile to post those questions in our community, and we can, because everything is so like, there's so much potential with Gen AI and with Scenario that oftentimes it's just about exploring the workflow and it might be very different from workflows we've tried before. So yeah. Anyone else have any questions? Let's see. So I had just saved that, and if there are no more questions, I know we're a little close to the end of time. I wanted to show you just one more tool here. I'll keep an eye on the chat in case any more questions come up. But we do have another piece that we're integrating into the web app. It is in the API right now. And it is a pixel art converter. If you are doing something that's pixel art driven, it does pixelize the image. The biggest challenge with pixel art and Gen AI is just scale. So this post-processing tends to be a better choice than actively processing like in the image, because scale is a hard thing to communicate to Gen AI. So like a tree might have just the same amount of pixels as a shoe, and that's not always the most useful for a designer. So we always recommend for a pixel at this point post-processing, but yeah, this is just another tool, pixelicious.xyz. We have obviously all of these examples here are hopefully useful. Oh, this is the last one I was going to show. I actually generated it with the background generator, a duck field, which you can see here. And then I ran it through asset diffusion, because you can switch generators while you're going. So you could indeed, let me drop that in the chat. Awesome. And you can actually change the generator you're using and have it be a very different style. You can generate like a background in one and then switch the style and like restyle it with image to image or with composition control. So there's a lot of tools. It's definitely about exploring, about finding how it works in your pipeline, and going from there. If there are no more questions, I'm gonna wind it down here and pass it along to our lovely hosts.
Thank you so much. So I just want to take a moment to revisit Saga and the Saga Multiverse Hackathon and how Scenario fits in. So we really appreciate Scenario joining us and showing these tools for generative AI. We think this is going to have a big impact on the Web3 space. We see people using Saga chainlets to store in-game economies and spinning up, all the in-game assets using something like Scenario to generate that artwork. So we've added prize categories for generative AI, use of generative AI tools in this hackathon. And Scenario, if you participate and use their tools, you're going to be able to unlock potentially tens of thousands, $10,000 worth of Scenario credits for use if you get selected for best use of generative AI in your game application. For folks that have not yet gotten access to Saga, we strongly recommend going through the process of standing up your Saga chainlet. James, who is on the call, who can be reached at james@saga.xyz, can help you. If you haven't filled in the form, make sure you do that. Time is running out. Go through the process. We got $50,000 worth of prizes. Make sure to go walk through spinning up a chainlet, talk with James, and get that working sooner rather than later so that you got time to build something cool by the end of this hackathon. Final thought, we have stood up a Telegram group for matching because the largest prize in this hackathon is a multiverse matching prize, which involves collaborations across projects. So we want to make sure people make use of that Telegram channel. Maybe James or somebody can post that in the chat. So definitely head in there and introduce yourself and try to meet other projects that you can collaborate with so that you can be applicable for that grand prize, which will involve tickets to our Multiverse Summit, which will be unveiled shortly. So we strongly recommend getting in there, get matching, check out those tools, and make sure to launch your chainlet. Any other comments, James, before I guess Gloria will close it out?
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate Scenario. Thank you guys for it's so cool because you've got all the detail, and so someone can get as rich contextually as they want in designing, and they could stay at a high level. And it's so great because, you know, especially for a lot of the startup projects, they're you know, wearing multiple hats, right? And so I think this is really cool because you can have that expert level graphic designer, but you can have someone that has, you know, a smaller design set capabilities and literally go in, and it's just amazing. Like, I'm sitting here wanting to start using it while you're going through the demo. So that was fantastic. And yeah, so again, thanks for being part of Saga. We appreciate that. And we appreciate what you're doing for the community as well. And again, to reiterate what Rex says, we are counting down 19 days to the final submissions for the hackathon. So again, feel free to ping me. We're sending out, we have open office hours we just did this morning, and we had a lot of great people on that call. We're going to do it again this evening. And then of course the schedule is on that email. So again, I'm James at saga.xyz. If you have not registered yet, you need help, whatever you're stuck, whatever little blockers you may be running into, challenges, we're here to help you guys and make you successful. So thank you again. And Rex, I'll hand it back to you.
Gloria.
Yep. So thank you for everyone for joining. Minta, thanks again. Honestly, I don't come from a generative AI background at all. So for me, this was super cool to see just like, yeah, the potential with generative AI. I'm super excited to see how the projects for the Saga Multiverse Hackathon will be leveraging your platform to, you know, build one of the best projects like in the industry. And while this workshop is over, just a friendly reminder, we have one more workshop next week for you guys. So be sure to join to wrap up these value add workshops. And this session will be available on YouTube to reference. But yeah, since I know everyone is busy building, I'll let you guys go for now. But thank you again for joining us, and I'll see you guys soon. Thanks, everyone.